Hi everyone. Today I finally decided to sit down and do it. I'm going to make a Pineapple open-face Chinese poker tutorial. So a little bit of background. Pineapple is something I've been playing for just under a decade now. I've been playing forever. Started my freshman year of high school, played on and off until now, which is my senior year of college. So I've been playing quite a while, and I consider myself to be quite good. So what is Pineapple open-face Chinese poker? So Pineapple is essentially a 13-card variation of traditional poker, and I will get more into specifics right here. So I just want to briefly mention that I'm going to be using the Pineapple app as kind of a teaching template. I just think it has a nice, clean UI. Obviously, you can play this game in person too. So traditionally, this game is played against one opponent, although you can play with up to 2 other opponents, so that's 3 people total. And as you can see in front of you, there are 13 slots for each player, and those represents where you'll play each of your cards. So as you can see on the bottom, there are 5 card slots. In the middle, there are 5 card slots, and up top, there are 3 card slots. So this is where it becomes incredibly important to know poker hands, because this is what you're going to be filling those rows up with. So on the bottom and middle row, you're going to be filling those up with 5-card hands. And on the top row, you're going to be filling it up with a 3-card hand, which obviously means you can't do a straight or a flush, but you can do up to a 3 of a kind on top. So your goal when playing these hands is to play the best possible hands you can play while maintaining a reverse hierarchical order, which means you want to have your best hand on the bottom, your second best hand in the second row, and your worst hand up top. So I'm just going to go through a couple examples of what this reverse hierarchical order could look like. This hand is a great example of a classic Pineapple hand. You have a flush on the bottom, a pair in the middle, and an ace high up top. So this maintains that order, right? You have the best hand on the bottom, the second best in the middle, and the worst up top. This is another hand that maintains that order. You have a full house on the bottom, and a 3 of a kind in the middle, and a king high up top. So that's, best in the bottom, second best in the middle, worst up top, once again. So I'm going to put a couple examples of hands that would be a little bit more confusing. So in this hand, I have 2 pair on the bottom, 2 pair in the middle, and king high up top. But my 2 pair on the bottom would be considered a higher hand because my highest pair is a pair of aces, and in the middle, it's only a pair of kings. Here's another example of that. This is a flush on the bottom, a flush in the middle, and ace high up top, but my flush on the bottom is higher than my flush on the second row, and both of those are obviously higher than ace high, so it still maintains that reverse hierarchical order I was talking about. So now that you understand basic hand structure, I'm going to explain how the game is played. So in every Pineapple game, there are 5 rounds of dealing. So in the first round of dealing, you're given 5 cards, all of which you have to play. So remember that your goal is to maintain that order while playing the best possible hands you can play. So here I was given 3 diamonds and a jack and a 2. I played the 3 diamonds to go for the flush on the bottom, and I played the jack and the 2 in the middle to go for either 2 pair or 3 of a kind at best in the middle. So maintaining that order of best on the bottom, second best in the middle, and we'll see what happens up top as the game goes on. So in each subsequent dealing, so the next 4, you get 3 cards, 2 of which you have to play, and the third of which you discard. So in this case, I got a 6 of clubs, a 7 of diamonds, and a 2 of diamonds. So this one was kind of a no-brainer. I got a 2 of diamonds, a 7 of diamonds, and a 6 of clubs. I'm going to complete the flush on the bottom and play both diamonds and discard the 6 so that I can focus on the middle and the top hands in later draws. So it's here where I'm going to tell you that after you make the next draw, or in the app's case, when you click the set button, you cannot go back and change the order of any cards. So let's say for the sake of an example, that on the second draw, I were to get a jack and a 2 and let's say a king of diamonds. It doesn't really matter for the sake of the example, but I couldn't go back and change it so that the jack and the 2 are on the bottom row and the queen, the 4, and the 5 are on the second row. So this is the third draw. I got a jack, a 5, and an ace. So I'm going to play that jack in the middle to make a pair, the ace up top. I'm going to discard the 5. So this is the fourth draw, and it's kind of a bummer. I'll get more into strategy later, but I'm going to play 2 of these. I'm going to play the 10 and the 9. So on the fifth and final draw, I got a king, an 8, and a 4, of which I'm going to play the king and the 8, and that completes the game. So after the game is over, your hands will be scored against your opponent's corresponding hand. So the bottom, or your bottom hand against their bottom hand, and your middle hand against theirs, etc., etc. But I'll get more into scoring later. So it's at this point where you may be thinking, well, what if I play wrong and my middle hand is better than my bottom hand, or my top hand is better than both? Well, that is the nasty, nasty thing that is fouling. So this would be a pretty common foul. You know, you're going for the straight on the bottom, but in the last draw, you don't hit the 3 or the 8 to complete it. And in the middle row, you have 2 pair, which is better than your bottom hand, so you foul. So this would be the result of a really aggressive play strategy resulting in a foul. You're going for a flush on the bottom, a 2 pair in the middle, and a high pair up top. You don't hit the flush, you don't hit the 2 pair in the middle, but you hit the high pair up top. That pair up top beats both the middle and the bottom hand, you foul. It wouldn't matter if it just beat the middle hand, you would still foul. So this is a really nasty, nasty foul that confuses a lot of people when they first start playing. As you can see, I have a full house in the bottom, I have nothing in the middle, and I have nothing up top. But the highest card in my top hand is higher than my highest card in the middle hand, so I still foul. So as I mentioned, I'll get more into the scoring as the video goes on, but for now, all you need to know is that you really, really don't want to foul, because if you do, you automatically lose the hand so long as your opponent doesn't also foul, and then it's just kind of a draw, and nothing really changes as a result. So now that I've talked about kind of the ugly part of the game, which is fouling, I can tell you about the beautiful part of the game, which is Fantasyland, and let me tell you, you really want to be in Fantasyland. So Fantasyland puts you in the position where you're given 14 cards at the beginning of the game, and you can play them exactly as you please. This is obviously a wonderful thing. It eliminates the possibility of fouling and allows you to play the best possible hand given 14 cards. You know, Fantasylands can obviously be good and bad. It's 14 random cards. You know, you can get Fantasylands that are everything, and you can get Fantasylands that are nothing. I've had both. This was a relatively good one. I got 2 3-of-a-kinds and 2 pairs, so I played a double full house, which is the best possible play I could make. So there are a number of ways to get into Fantasyland, one of which is to get aces up top while still maintaining that reverse hierarchical order. Another of which is to get queens up top while maintaining that order. Another of which is to get kings up top while maintaining that order. And of course, while maintaining that order, if you were to get trips up top, you would also go to Fantasyland in the next hand. I put 2s. Any trips will work. It could be 5s, it could be 4s, it doesn't really matter. So this is a common point of confusion, so I'm just going to point it out. And I'm not sure why, but a pair of jacks up top will not take you to Fantasyland. So every other face card but jacks will take you to Fantasyland, of course, unless you get trip jacks up top. So once you're already in Fantasyland, you actually can stay in Fantasyland, but the rules for staying are different than the rules for initially getting there. So if you're already in Fantasyland, you can stay by getting a straight flush. I have an ace through 5 of hearts straight flush, but any straight flush will work. A royal flush will work. So in addition, getting any 4-of-a-kind in Fantasyland will keep you in Fantasyland. I use 2s as an example again. And in addition, any 3-of-a-kind up top will also keep you in Fantasyland once you're already there. So I'm just going to briefly go over scoring. I could get way into it, but to be honest, there's kind of no point. Most people are playing on the app, and if you're playing in person, you can just pull up this guide. I'll link it in the description. But I will briefly go over it, and I will also go over some of the things you need to know about scoring when developing a strategy. So immediately when you're looking at this chart, you'll notice that there's 3 columns, the bottom hand, the middle hand, and the top hand. And under each of those columns, there are all the possible hands you can get. And next to each of those hands is the amount of points that it is worth. So for example, you'll see that on the bottom hand, a full house is worth 6 points. Now here's where I want to point out that the same hand on the middle hand is worth twice as much as it's worth on the bottom hand. So for example, I mentioned that the full house on the bottom hand was worth 6 points. In the middle hand, it's worth 12. And now I want you to turn your attention all the way to the right under the column top hand. And here, a measly pair is worth a ton of points. Just getting a pair of queens up top is worth more than getting a straight on the bottom and the middle hand combined. In addition, it's way easier to get. If you think about this from the beginning of the game, you can get that pair of queens up top without fouling by, for example, getting 2 pair on the bottom, a pair of kings in the middle. And truthfully, that isn't very hard to do. At the very least, it is way easier than getting a straight on the bottom and a straight in the middle. And it's worth more. So when developing a personal pineapple play strategy, I would really try to keep in mind that the higher up a hand is, the higher it's scored. Okay, so I certainly got a little bit ahead of myself there. I'm going to circle back and talk a little bit about the basics of scoring. So as I mentioned, it's going to be scoring your hands against your opponent's corresponding hands. So in this hand, for example, my bottom hand, my flush, would be scored against my opponent's 2 pair on the bottom row. So for starters, since I beat him on the bottom row, because a flush is obviously better than a 2 pair, I already get 1 point. But then I also add the scoring bonus for that hand in that row. So to quickly refer back to this little scoring guide, you can see that the flush bonus is 4. So you add that 4 to 1, and that's where the number 5 comes from. So that's how many points you get for the bottom row. So then you just do the same things in the subsequent rows. So in the second row, for example, I have a pair of 9s. My opponent has a pair of kings, which is higher. However, referring back to the sheet, you'll see that there's no scoring bonus for a pair. So that's just going to be worth -1 for me and +1 for them. And on the top, I have Jack high, and they have a pair of queens, so they beat me up there. That's +1, and then plus the scoring bonus of 7, which is what queens are worth up top. And then at the end of it all, you're just going to add it all together for each player. So, for example, on the bottom, I have +5, in the middle, -1, on the top, -8. So that's going to all even out to be worth -4. So another thing you have to keep in mind is that if you beat your opponent on all 3 rows, you get a scooping bonus, which is worth 3 points, or vice versa. If they beat you on all 3 rows, they get that scooping bonus of 3 points. So in this case, right, my opponent beat me for 11 on the bottom, 9 in the middle, and 1 up top. That only adds up to 21. But since they beat me on all 3 rows, they get that scooping bonus of +3, and that number becomes 24. So this is why it's so important not to foul, because so long as your opponent also doesn't foul, you are automatically losing 6 points, because they beat you on all 3 rows, so that's +3, and then they also automatically get the scooping bonus, that's also +3. So at the very least, they're getting 6 points on you. And if not, they're getting much, much, much more. So a common point of confusion when scoring is, let's say you both get the same hand on the same row, which is exactly what happened here. I got a flush on the bottom, and my opponent got a flush on the bottom. Whoever has the higher version of the same hand is just going to get +1, and the other person is going to get -1. And I don't really want to go too much into scoring, as I mentioned a bunch, I think. But if you're going to play with 3 people, it's the same scoring system. But you score your hand against both other players' scores, and then you add those together. Here's just a little guide of how to do that. It does get a little confusing, but once you get good at scoring, it's not very hard. So I haven't mentioned a definitive end to this game yet, and that's because there really isn't one. They can go on as long or as little as you want. Most of the games I play usually go on to 100. A lot of people play to 50 also. I also have some no-limit ones. This one has no limit. I'm up 715 on my friend Daniel. So yeah, just to mention that really quick. So I'm just going to do a brief segment here about strategy. I'm planning on making a separate video about this entirely because there are a ton of different strategies, and none are necessarily right. Some people play more by the odds, some people do not. But I would say general convention is that you're always going for Fantasyland. Fantasyland really is the name of the game. I would say most strategies would emphasize that. And there's very good reason for this. As I mentioned before, a pair of queens up top is worth more than a straight on the bottom and the middle row. A pair of kings is worth even more than a pair of queens, and a pair of aces even more, and any pair of trips even more than that. So already you're getting a ton of points just by having the cards necessary to go to Fantasyland. And then in Fantasyland, you are all but guaranteed a decent hand. If not, at the very least, you won't foul. So, going to Fantasyland and also being in Fantasyland doesn't necessarily lock in the chances of you winning two hands. It gives you the best odds of winning two hands in a row. So right now on my screen is a dumbed down version of my priority list that I use for my strategy. The first priority is not to foul, because that automatically means that you lose. You do not want to foul. The second priority is to go to Fantasyland at all costs. If that means throwing away a flush on the bottom for two pair on the bottom, if that means throwing away everything just to get a pair of queens up top, the second priority is to go to Fantasyland. So the third priority, I just wrote down everything else because honestly, there isn't really another priority. So long as you don't foul and you really try to go to Fantasyland as much as possible, you're probably going to be playing pretty well. I guess if I had to give a proper third priority, I would say building a decent bottom hand, because it's honestly not very hard to get either a flush or a full house on the bottom hand, which is significantly better than, just two pair or three of a kind. So I guess I would say building a decent bottom hand. So there's a ton more I want to say. I want to talk more about strategy. I want to talk about variations of the game. I want to talk more specifically about playing in person. But I've decided for brevity's sake, I'm going to end this video right here and make videos in the future on those topics. And just kind of end this video with a slideshow of some, showcasing one of the more magical parts of the game. Really the best part of the game. When you get these hands that are otherworldly, that just defy all odds, 1 in a billion hands. And the thing is, you will get these hands. And the wonderful thing about it is the more and more you play the game, the more and more you get these hands because you get more familiar with the cards. This hand is just ridiculous. 4 of a kind aces. A typical pineapple hand is what, 6 to 20 points, I'd say. 20 points being on the better end of things, but every once in a while, you'll see the numbers creep up into the high 30s, even low 40s. And it's really, you can't even describe the feeling of it. And, I'm going to end it off with a truly magical moment. I have to bring this up. I was teaching my friend how to play. We set my phone up on her projector, and we projected the game against the wall. I eventually went to Fantasyland, and I got 2 4 of a kind and was able to put 3s up top as well. A 13-card poker game where you're getting 2 4 of a kinds and a pair, it doesn't happen every day. It was, there's no other way to say it. It was just a magical moment.